All right. Hello, everybody. I am excited to be here with you guys today, and we have a big topic. So I'm hoping to answer any questions you guys might have as we kind of go along. Feel free. We don't have a huge group. Raise your hand, ask a question, all those kinds of things. So, but we're going to just jump right in if that sounds good to you all. So, as Sherry mentioned, I am in private practice, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW, and that just means that I have a license to do therapy, okay? And so sometimes it's confusing. There's lots of different titles out there, right? So you have LPCs, licensed professional counselor, LCSW, psychologist, psychiatrist. It can be really confusing, and I don't think we describe it very well to people sometimes. So psychiatrists are medical doctors, and they're the ones who are prescribing medications, right? If you're going to a psychiatrist and you think you're going to get hour-long therapy, that's not really what's going to happen. It's usually like a 15-minute conversation that you end up having, right? But LPCs, psychologists, LCSWs, we're all kind of in the same boat. So I do have a private practice, and actually, before I agreed to do this talk, that was what I was doing pretty much full-time. Since I agreed to do the talk, I actually decided, I took a leap of faith and joined the Blue Springs South High School to become their social worker. And so this was one of those things that I really felt called to do, and it was kind of one of these conversations like, are you sure? And then it was like, are you sure you're sure? You know, with the conversation with the big man. And so I really do feel that I've been called to be at the high school. And it kind of made this topic even more meaningful in some sort of ways, because I know a lot of these high schoolers are dealing with these kinds of issues. And so, and so I'm also a mother of 3. These are my people. Actually, they're just walking in. These are some of my people. I have 3 kiddos. My daughters are 12, 10, and 8. This picture was taken a year ago because my oldest is now significantly taller than me. So she is hitting that age where this topic is really relevant for her as well. And so that's kind of a little bit about myself. And while I say qualifications, I feel well qualified to speak about mental health. Social media is like this topic that is new to everybody. This graph here just shows you a little bit. It says the number of people using social media platforms from 2004 to 2019. So you can see, I don't know how clear that is. You guys can see that clearly? Okay, cool. That top number is for Facebook in 2019, it's even higher now, it's like 2.5 billion people that are, using this platform. And so you can see really in the last 10 years and even more in the last 15, just leaps and bounds of growth onto these platforms. And so nobody really knows what's going on. Nobody really knows that much about it yet. And so we're kind of going to be learning about this together tonight, okay? So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So our agenda for the evening, basically I'm going to define mental health and social media. We're going to identify some risk factors of social media, explore mental health statistics. We're going to ask the question, is social media evil? Because it might be. No, I'm just kidding. So how does social media work? How do you set yourself and your family up for success? What does the Bible say about social media? And should I use social media? So that's kind of what we're going to hit. Like I said, feel free to stop me at any point. But to jump right into some definitions. So mental health, it includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also determines how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. So really mental health is different than mental illness. And so that's kind of a piece that I think we sometimes use those terms interchangeably, right? So poor mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. A person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with mental illness. Likewise, we can have a mental illness and be mentally healthy, right? We can have strong mental health in the moment. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so I think that's an important distinction. Oh, sorry, I guess I jumped ahead there. I forgot my clicker. So social media, let's talk about what that is. So really it's websites, applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. It's also forms of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, other content. Hey guys. I think another piece that I'd like to sort of make a note of is that people use social media to stay in touch and interact with friends, family, and various communities. But businesses, they're also using social media, but really for different purposes. Businesses use those social applications to market and promote their products and track their customers and their customer concerns, right? So it's interesting because we sometimes think about what we're doing and I'm just talking to my friends, but there's businesses that are tracking all that stuff, and there's algorithms, and it's kind of interesting. Let's jump into some of the statistics real quick. I'm going to kind of just throw a lot of information, and then we're going to kind of do some I don't know, digging into it, I guess. So this first part, bear with me. We're just going to throw out a lot of info, okay? So according to onlinetherapy.com, 58% of Americans say social media negatively affects their mental health. So that's over half of Americans are really going, yeah, this really isn't really good for my well-being, is what they're saying, okay? Among those affected, 64% experience anxiety from their social media use. Users also experience depression, dissatisfaction with life, fear of missing out, FOMO. You guys know that term, right? Fear of missing out, and body image issues as a result of these apps. And then it goes on to say 71%, got that up there? Yeah, 71% of users who experience negative mental health impacts from social media blame misinformation and disinformation. So I like this. Don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. I don't think Abraham Lincoln said that, but he might have if he was alive when social media was here. So I think that we get a lot of misinformation, right? And it's like there's a picture and there's a thing, and then we have the fact checks. And not only do we get misinformation in this way, but we also get misinformation about if somebody doesn't give us our immediate feedback, we're interpreting that as, oh, they left me on red, they don't care, they're angry at me. We're internalizing all this stuff that's really inaccurate. It actually happened twice this week. At school, I had 2 different times kids came into my office crying in tears. Oh, this person is mad at me, and I don't know what I did wrong, and they left me on red. And another one was the girlfriend didn't respond, and the next day, they both came into my office and said, "Oh, guess what? Their phone died, or it was just misinformation." Had this whole emotional episode based on misinformation, right? So that's one of the risks for sure. So what are some of the other negative effects of social media on society? Definitely comparing our lives that we know all the negative parts of and the not fancy parts of to our friends and other people's best lives, right? The clip shows of the highlights, right? We also feel some pressure to maintain a certain image. Think about this particularly for our young people. At any moment, someone can snap their picture, and if they don't have makeup on or they're looking this way or that way, they're pretty fearful of that being blasted. So there's definitely like pressure to present a certain image out there. I think there's definitely becoming an addiction of instant gratification. There is, to back up, just with the instant gratification, we click, we get immediate feedback. We text someone, they immediately respond to us. There's just a lot of immediate gratification. And as we know in most of the world outside of social media, there's not that instant response all the time, right? We do something and sometimes it's really slow before we get our response about if it's being well received or not, right? Okay, so, there we go. The difference between real life and virtual life, right? So sometimes in our real lives, things look quite different than we might be presenting in our virtual lives. And other people too, right? We don't really know what's real on somebody's life versus what they're just presenting out there. The impacts on our sleep, I think this one's significant in that, I don't know, some of you are probably most of us are probably old enough to know the times when, after like 10 o'clock, there was nothing to watch on TV. And like, you were like, okay, I can watch the shopping network or I can go to bed. I think I'll go to bed, right? But at this point, you can talk to your friends until all hours of the night. You can get any kind of, watch movies. You can be interacting. You can read things, articles, all the things until all hours of the night. So it really is hard to not let that impact your sleep sometimes. So not to mention the actual just screens and the way they interact with our brains. So envy and jealousy in relationships, this is definitely an issue for us sometimes. If you see your friend group, and you're not in it, and they're out, that can really be, you can really create a lot of jealousy and a lot of feelings and negativity in us, right? So I think that's true for all ages, right? Not just our young people. Let's see here. You start with one and keep wanting more. What I mean about this is you might start with one social media platform, or maybe you're like, I'm just going to watch one YouTube video, and then you go down the rabbit hole, right? So literally these apps are designed to keep you clicking. Why are they designed to keep you clicking? Money, Brian gives me this sign, because the more clicks they get, the more money that they get, right? So it's all, like, it's designed in a way to keep you connected to it. And it gives you pop-ups and notifications, and hey, you didn't look at this yet. You ought to look at what Susie Bob is doing over here. Susie Bob? That's not a word. That's not a normal person's name, Susie Bob. I think might be my next pet's name. So, but anyway, so yes, you just keep going for more and more. Let's see. Stalking and being ignored, leading to insecurity. So this is kind of interesting. There is access to people in a way that there's never been access to people before, right? So I can go and look at what my high school boyfriend was doing last weekend, and that's kind of weird, right? Today, now, I can still do that. And people can get into these kind of stalking patterns that they break up with somebody and they can see what they're doing, and that is hard, I think, for people. Also, that being ignored, maybe you put something out there into the world and nobody responds. You don't actually know if anybody's seen it, by the way, when you're putting it on some social media. It might tell you that they've seen it, but did they really? I don't know. And, you know, you're not getting responses, or you're not getting your likes, and then that somehow impacts your self-esteem. And so it's really complicated, I think. It can lower our mood levels in a general way. Decision fatigue is a thing, I think, right? So again, if we go back to that, you know, back in the day, it was like, oh, do I go to bed or watch Home Shopping Network? That's like one decision. But like with social media now, we have tons of decisions that we have to make over and over again. Do I respond? Do I not respond? Do I engage in this discussion about politics, or do I not engage? Do I put my phone down, or do I, there's just so many decisions on a constant basis that we're having to deal with. All right, so I want to show a clip from The Social Dilemma. How many of you have seen this movie on Netflix, right? Okay. For those of you who haven't, I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix. It's really, I think, helpful in understanding kind of how social media works. It's some of the creators, actually, of some of the platforms like Facebook and different things are quoted in this, and they really talk about their own ethical dilemmas about how these supercomputers are really impacting the world in pretty powerful ways. So let's go ahead. So I think that highlights some important factors, and it's interesting because he ends with, I think they should be responsible. However, so far, I haven't seen them be responsible in this way. I don't think they're going to all of a sudden decide to be responsible in this way. So it's kind of up to us, right? So let's move on and talk some more about some other pieces. We know medical news today says social media use can lead to low-quality sleep and harm mental health. It has associations with depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. I was talking with some seniors at Blue Springs South the other day, and I said, what do you guys think? And they said, one young lady says, we were never meant to see the things we see. And I think she's pretty right on that. We're not necessarily meant to see all the pieces of what we're being exposed to. So there's an overexposure to information, right? Both information about what your friends are doing, information in general. You can find out so much about so many things, which is kind of that blessing, but also a curse, right? So it's just so much information. It's also a platform for predators, oftentimes, these social media kind of ways of being exposed, right? So if you have kids that are posting things, it's pretty clear when someone is emotionally vulnerable, right? It doesn't take a lot to figure that out. A few posts about being sad, and I feel like that's a potential target on their back for predators. Not to mention that people often pretend to be someone that they're not on social media, right? And they can lure kids in. So those are definitely some problems. Sorry, I'm having a moment where I'm just like, did I share this? Yeah. One of the things that I hear a lot for teenagers right now is this sort of blackmailing thing with like, send me this. And then it's sort of like, if you don't send it to me, I'm going to send you this. I'm going to blast this about you. And so there's this like weird thing that can happen where there's threats of being blackmailed by maybe a picture they previously sent, or maybe just even saying that you've done something that you never did, right? And so it becomes very kind of complicated for kids to navigate some of these ways that predators are out there. Decreased healthy activity. We're on our phones, right? We sit on the couch, we look at them, we do this stuff, right? And so we're not moving around. We're not doing some of our other priorities in life. Our kids, of course, they want to be on their devices, right? They want to be on their devices. We want to be on our devices, right? And healthy activities, all kinds of ways in which they're being decreased, right? So whether that's just getting outside and playing, whether that's talking to someone in person, I think about, like in activities when the parents are picking the kids up, right? What are they all doing? All the parents that are on pickup, they're just on their phone. They're not talking to each other most of the time. Sometimes people still are, and I think that that's really positive, but you definitely see people sort of use their device to avoid an uncomfortable social moment, right? So I think we're using our devices to avoid feelings a lot. Perceived isolation is an issue for sure. Disrupted concentration. I think about my husband. He had an app that he used for work, and it would be like, correct me if I'm wrong, 300-ish in one day messages. If you think about if it takes 5 seconds to look at that, each time it dings, how many, and not to mention to refocus your time, refocus your brain on the task you were doing. It's incredible the amount of sort of distraction that we end up with in our lives, right? So let's see. Overstimulation, we've kind of alluded to this. Some of the different, and I think of even video games as being a social media platform because they're interacting with each other, right? And there's so much stimulation to our brain. Everything else seems pretty boring at that point, right? So it really, there's studies been done that it lights up some of the same places in our brain that literally crack lights up, right? And so when people come off drugs, they're bored with life. It's sort of like nothing feels very exciting because we're at this level of stimulation that seems so different from where we were. So that's, I think, another issue. Body image issues. I think that this is one of the pieces, too, that that high school senior was referring to is that we have filters. We see all these images of ourselves over and over and over. I'm really glad that I didn't have to look at myself as a high schooler as often as our high schoolers are having to look at themselves, right? You know what I'm saying? So, and I'm saying high schoolers, all of us, right, too? We all have these ways in which our pictures being posted and things that can really be kind of not great for us. So I'm going to show another clip here. Particularly about the impact on teens. So I don't know about you guys, but those statistics are kind of horrifying, right? And I think it's pretty undeniable that social media is having a direct impact on these things, right? That line couldn't be much more clear, I don't think, right? It just steadily increases at that point there. And so it's definitely a concern for our teens and for all people. So here's just some sort of funny memes, I guess. I don't know if they're funny. There's some memes that, but it's like the crack, immediately gratifying and hugely addictive. Social media, where hypocrisy, falseness, double standards, rumors, and depression meet up for coffee. Social media, it's training us to compare our lives instead of appreciating everything we are. No wonder everyone's always depressed, right? The CEO of LA Times said social media is the cancer of our time. And this is one of my favorites. Social media made y'all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. so right, we got real comfortable with saying things behind a screen, and people, they're really tough behind those screens, I tell you what, right? So I guess it leads to this question in my mind: is social media evil? Is it evil? Yes. No, I'm just kidding. So seemingly, in some ways, what's that? Take a vote? Yeah. I mean, it's pretty scary. And it's definitely, I have more than once said, social media is the devil, or, my phone is the devil, this stuff, right? However, so was the gramophone, the telegraph, the radio, and the television, right? So people really don't like new things. The printing press even, right? They believe the printing press would lead to the loss of memory. And so we generally, as people, we do not like change. But you know what? This change is upon us. Social media is not going anywhere. We're not going to just it's not going to not be here, right? So I think then what we have to do is both look for the good and understand how to work with it, right? It's a double-edged sword. It has the power to, sorry, I lost my spot there. The power to do real good, but also the power to hurt. And so being aware of that it is a double-edged sword, right? So some of the good stuff, social media is a conversation, it's customer service, it's advertising, it's connectedness, right? I think most teens aren't so much addicted to social media as they are addicted to each other, and that's not new, right? So I think we can use social media to try to impress people, or we can use it to try to impact people, right? So there's a lot of ways in which we can impact people in a positive way through social media. Social networks represent the digital reflection of what we humans do. We connect and we share, right? And so this is a new way to do it. We're just all kind of freaked out and unequipped for it, right? Social media is the ultimate equalizer. It gives a voice and a platform to anyone willing to engage. I think that this is really powerful too, right? Potentially, people can have a voice that have never had a voice in the past. And so there's some power in that. So we do not have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it. I mean, it's going to be there, right? I mean, you get to choose how much you do of it. And you get to choose which social media you allow your people to do, your children, your families, right? But it's here. We're going to have to deal with it. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but just kids' activities, it's like, oh, get on here and we're going to post about, it's almost like you have to follow these things, right? So the question becomes setting yourself and your family up for success. So what are some ways in which we can set ourselves up for success? And so to kind of work through this, I want to reference the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? How many of you are familiar with this book? Okay. Almost all of you. Wow, that's impressive. So great book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. So you guys then understand some of these concepts. Seek first to understand. Begin with the end in mind. Be proactive. Think win-win. Put first things first. Synergize and sharpen the saw. So we're going to dive into each of those a little bit more here. Seek first to understand. So this basically, I think, is really powerful. We need to seek first to understand all the time, right? One quick example of why it's important to seek first to understand, this happened just this weekend. My daughter says, my youngest, my 8-year-old says, hey, can I go inside Emma's house and play? And I said, no, not today. I need you to, stay outside of the house, etc. And we go to look for her, can't find her. We knock on their door. She's inside the house. Rage, right? I literally very specifically told you not to go inside the house. So we were on our way to a volleyball game. We were like, let's put this on the shelf over here to deal with later tonight. So we come back, and I could have immediately, laid into her, right? I could have immediately chewed her up one side and down the other about her disrespect and her, the risks she took and all the things. But what I chose to do instead was to try to understand first. So I said, what happened? Tell me how, you knew you weren't supposed to go in, so help me understand. So she says, well, we were playing outside, and then we were playing in the garage with the garage door open. But then she wanted to get her cat out. So then they closed the garage door so the cat couldn't get out. And I'm like, okay, now we're in gray land, right? So it wasn't as blatant of a disrespect as I thought. And so we're always working. We should always be working, in my opinion, if we want to be successful and healthy in our relationships, to understand. So that's, I think, our first task, is seek first to understand. It's not only understand each other, but to understand what we're working with. So again, social media is so brand new to all of us, really, in the scheme of things, that we have to understand it a little bit better. And so I think that this clip is one that is going to help us understand a little bit more how it works, how social media itself works. We want to understand, I just said this stuff, sorry. Understand each other, understand how it works, right? So I certainly don't intend to have a political discussion here, but I think that it illustrates an important piece of how social media works. It tells you what you already believe, and it gives you information to keep you clicking, right? It has no other goals except for to sell things and to get, to make more money, right? And so the platform itself. So it can lead to these situations where we are very divided and that we're not being exposed to the same information. So it's really kind of confusing because our realities can be quite different based on what we're consuming and what we're reading. And so supercomputers, it's a thing, right? These supercomputers are exceptionally high-performing computers able to process vast amounts of data very quickly and draw key insights from it. There are algorithms that are used in social media to sort content in a user's feed. With so much content available, it's a way for social networks to prioritize content they think a user will like based on a number of factors. So we really have very little to do with what we end up seeing. We click, and then they're gathering information, and then this is how it all works, right? And really, each click is a way, and each thing that it generates for you, it's a way to manipulate you, and it's a way to get you to keep on whatever the site is, right? They want you to stay there. So, let's go on. So, I think, just to back up, I think it's important to understand how it works so that we are less manipulatable, right? Like, we don't want to be manipulated. We want to have good perspective, right? So if we're just living it and that's our whole reality, that's one thing. But if we're able to remove it from our, and be aware of it, then we can not be so easily manipulated by it. So seek first to understand and then begin with the end in mind. So this concept, I think it's really important to ask ourselves, what's the point? Why are we on here? What do we hope to gain or accomplish by being on social media, right? What do we want for ourselves, for our children? I think most of us could say for our children, we want healthy development, right? So we know, as they mentioned earlier, face-to-face communication, physical activities, exposure to nature, and sleep are all important for healthy development, right? So if we're missing those things because we're being kind of unaware and we haven't begun with the end in mind and we're just letting our kids be on social media all the time, then that can be problematic, right? So we have to begin our interaction with social media with our end goals in mind, I think. So it's important to ask these questions. What are your goals for use of social media? What are your goals for mental health? What do you want these things to look like? How do you want your well-being to be psychologically, socially, all that stuff, right? So what do you want that to look like and how do you create it? So we begin with the end in mind. I think it's important that we be proactive. This is the next one, right? Set up for success and be intentional, right? So we have to kind of, to be interacting with social media in a way that we don't get overly manipulated. I think we have to be proactive. We have to set things up. We have to set expectations. There was another example of maybe what this might look like. The very first time my kids were able to use Messenger Kids, right? Messenger Kids, they want to talk to their friends. Okay, finally cave. We let them get Messenger Kids. First day, not 30 minutes into them having Messenger Kids, one of them takes a picture of the other and then sends it to a friend, a picture that was not flattering and they thought was kind of funny because it made them look not great, right? And so then immediately, 30 minutes in, there's crying, there's upset. Well, I take most of the responsibility for that because I did not set an expectation with them on the front end that we don't take pictures of people and send them to other people without their permission, right? That was my bad. So I did not set that expectation. Similarly, another time recently with the concept of expectations, I have said to my kids, get off YouTube. I don't really like it. I don't want you, don't get on that right now. You need to get off, right? So the other day, my daughter's looking at some YouTube videos, apparently on her school computer. I didn't know they could get on YouTube on their school computer. So this is one of the things, right? They get school computers and they're on YouTube. And she's looking at things. I didn't know she was on YouTube, but I kind of walk behind her and I see her kind of shut the computer. And I'm thinking, what is she doing? And so I come up behind her and I say, what are you doing? And she's, and then she starts to cry and she's upset. And But again, I have never said you can't be on YouTube. I just said I don't like it. When they were on it, I said, why don't you get off? I haven't made yet clear expectations around this. I haven't said don't. I haven't said you're not allowed. It's kind of vague, right? So we had that conversation. She was not in trouble. There was no big issue. She knew I didn't like it, but I was very unclear about what was allowed. So I think it's really important that we teach our youth social media rules, and also that we follow social media rules, right? That we kind of understand what is good social media etiquette and behavior so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. So it's important for us to not post or send anything on social media that we wouldn't want the whole world to see. And I literally mean that, right? So if you don't want the entire world to see it, don't put it on social media, because it could be seen by the entire world. Never talk negatively about others in text messages or on social media. If you wouldn't say it to their face, don't say it online. It's a really good rule, right? Even with texting your friends, right? Oh, this person did this. If you don't want them to see it, do not put that into a text message. It's highly probable that they will end up seeing that. Leave conversations where others break rule number 2, right? So I hear a lot of times kids saying, well, I got in trouble because my friends were saying this. Well, I don't have control over what they say. Yeah, but you're still participating in the conversation, right? And so by connection, you become kind of connected to those statements. So you have to figure out a way to sort of exit those conversations, right? And I think it's important that we empower our kids. How do you exit those kinds of conversations, right? Let's see. Never bully others via social media. The golden rule, obviously, treat other people how you would want to be treated. Never post or send photos in any state of undress. That's a good rule, right? We're just going to leave that one there. I don't need to dive into that one further. Always ask permission to post photos of others. So again, this was one of those rules that I didn't establish with my kiddos and is now established. But we need to ask people permission. Not everybody wants their photo blasted out there, right? Am I there? Yeah. Never post memes that are pornographic, racist, or otherwise hurtful to others. So humor is fun. I like humor. Humor's good, but not at the expense of people, right? And so we need to be thoughtful about what we're putting out there, because people can certainly make interpretations based on what we might find humorous, and we don't maybe mean it in a negative way. We just need to avoid that kind of context altogether. Never argue via text or social media. Work it out in person. I can't tell you how important I think this is. There is so much lost in text messaging. We read their tone, right? We read into their tone. We read into their intention. We internalize things in completely ways that can be taken out of context when we're doing it by writing, right? And so I think it's really important that we have these conversations verbally when we're having a disagreement or there's an issue, right? And then also do not impersonate others on social media. So I think this is one that gets broken a lot, and that it's really important that we follow, right? So we don't grab our friend's phone and message somebody and pretend like it was them. That's a bad plan, right? That's a recipe for bad things. Not impersonate even our own kids or our own spouses or something, right? We don't want to be doing that. Like, that's just a rule that we need to follow. Think win-win is the next sort of habit that's important to think about. So what do you want? What are your goals with social media? What do you want your kids to be doing? But then also, what do your kids want? Also win-win in terms of like, if you're just talking about yourself, we're not talking about our children or anything, we're just talking about ourselves. How do I get what I want out of social media and not have the negative parts? We want this to be win-win for everybody, right? So how do I set this up in a way where it is a win and not a loss? Like, I'm not compromising, right? So I think my husband likes to say, compromising is horrible. And most people would say, that's just a weird thing to say. But what he means by it is, I don't want anybody to compromise. I want both people to get what they want. And so thinking win-win, we have to have some conversations around that. What risk factors do you see with the social media? So right now, to be just sort of candid about where we're at, my kids are 12, 10, and 8. They don't have their own cell phones yet. None of them do. We're pretty rigid. I have been pretty fearful. I see a lot of danger on phones, and I think that it can be complicated. However, we're getting to the age that my oldest is definitely like ready for that. She's going, yes, I'm very ready for that. So she's ready for this. So I have to think about, how does she get her needs met? She wants to connect with her friends. She wants to be involved in these conversations that her peers are having. She is excited about those things, and I want her to have those things. I also want my concerns to be identified. So we are engaging in conversation about how do we both get that, right? How do we both get what we need? When we identify those risk factors, I think it's important that we set boundaries and that we then enforce those boundaries, right? So again, we have these supercomputers that are trying to get your kids to stay on and break rules and do all the things, right? Like they want your kids to do those things. So we have to enforce the boundaries. We have to be the bad guy sometimes, right? But okay, so then let's move on. Put first things first. I do the things that I have to do before I do the things that I want to do. Stay focused on what I'm doing, trying to minimize distractions, spend time on the things that are most important. So I think in terms of how do we put things first things first, I think it's important to sort of really talk about and identify what are your values, what's important to you, what do you value, what matters in your family and with your children. Priorities. What are your priorities? What needs to be taken care of first, right? So like for me, one of the things that I love to avoid doing with social media is my notes for work, right? We all have something that maybe it's like, oh, I need to do notes. I think I'll just check Facebook real quick, and it's like, that's not really my priority, right? I need to prioritize the things that are important first. I think when we're putting first things first, one of our big jobs as parents is to keep our children safe. So I think it's important that we put first things first and we make safety a priority, right? So that means following their accounts, potentially doing random phone checks. I think expectations for your kid, again, on the front end when they get the phone, it's not like this is your private information. My mom told me when I was little, very straightforward. She said, oh, if I find a diary, I will absolutely read it. And I was like, oh, but I knew. So then I knew if I put anything in there that she was going to read it. And so I actually think it is totally okay to go through your child's phone, right? I think that that's important, but you just tell them you're going to do it and then they know, right? So it is your job to know what's going on, and it's okay to assert that with them, right? Sometimes I think we feel like, oh, am I allowed to do this? Am I wrong to do it? Yes, do it. You're okay, right? The safety is the priority, right? So put the first things first in that way. I think that this is an important thing in terms of putting first things first. I think that it's important to have no phone zones and times in which you're not using your phone. So we don't do phones at the dinner table. And I told you my kids don't have phones. So that's really my husband and I rule. And sometimes we end up breaking that rule, and it's not, my daughter's going, yeah. But generally speaking, we try to enforce that, right? We don't want phones at the table. That's our time to connect. And if that phone dings, it's way too tempting to just look at it right in the middle of, conversation. But that gives a message to them that they're not as important as whatever's happening on my phone. So we try to keep them not on the table, right? And so establishing some times, before bed, I think it's important to get your kids off the phone so that their brains have a time to, shut down and go to sleep. So thinking about what are times and places that none of us, and I mean, parents are as guilty, if not more. I mean, you kids know, right? Our parents are sometimes more guilty than they are of having our phones be distracting us. Well, it's work. No, there's times for work and there's times not for work. And we can put the phone down for a few minutes to have those intimate conversations. I mean, you know how it is when somebody's talking to you. How important do you feel when they're like this? You don't, right? So we have to honor that too, and put first things first, put our family first and not be distracted by our phones in that way. Synergize, we are better together. It's about creating creative cooperation. And so I think us versus the supercomputers, right? So it's real easy to get frustrated with your family member, your partner, your children, if maybe they're looking at their phone too much, right? And we can tend to get mad at them. In therapy, one of the things I like to talk about a lot is about getting angry with issues instead of each other, right? So the issue is that we have this device that we all have access to all the time that is pulling us to it, right? And so instead of being like, you are just on your phone all the time, blah, 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 you know, that's not fun. It's much more helpful to work together and say, oh, hey, I think the supercomputer's getting you. You know, I've noticed it's really pulling you in lately. And we are against the supercomputer instead of us attacking each other because of the supercomputer. You see the difference? Does that make sense? So we're better together. We're going to attack the issue and not each other. We have to remember that our youth have that undeveloped prefrontal cortex, right? And so they're not supposed to be good at this yet, right? They're going to be impulsive. They're going to break the rules. And we have to kind of keep in mind that it has a large part to do with their brain that's not there yet. And instead of getting angry at them, it's about helping them, right? It's about how do we help them navigate this world despite their brains, right? So we're going to work together for the benefit of all. Our own relationship with social media should be synergistic. And what I mean by that is that, again, we want how we're interacting with social media to be a positive thing, right? And so we're going to work together with it instead of it just controlling us and it being a bad thing, right? The next concept is sharpen the saw. I think most of you might be familiar with this if you know the 7 habits, but the idea is that we often get so busy sawing, producing results of some sort, that we forget to sharpen our saw, maintain or increase our capacity to produce results in the future. And so with social media, it's kind of weird to think about what does that mean to sharpen the saw, but I think we all have moments when we need to pause and say, how is this going? Is this benefiting me? We have to evaluate if some sort of change is needed. And I think these are conversations we can have with one another, and that we can have with our children, so we can have a conversation with our partner like, oh yeah, what social media are you using right now? How is that feeling? What is that, are you enjoying it? Do you find yourself, you can have conversations around these things, and I think it's important for us to help our kids reflect on that too. How do you feel after you get on Twitter? Do you really like, what's the other one called? I'm just blanking on it. TikTok, right? Like, is that bringing you joy? Is it bringing you joy? Is it bringing you happiness? Do you feel good after you use it? Do you feel like you're using it too much? We're getting them, it's part of our job is to train our kids how to think about what they're doing, right? Not to tell them that they're doing it right or wrong, but to get them to think about how they feel about how they're doing it. Make sense? So evaluate if change is needed. Sometimes I think it's important that we do a detox, a social media detox, right? There's times when I'm done with Facebook for a while. It's definitely pulling me in too much. I'm just done, right? There are times I think when it's important for us to just sort of put our phone away for a whole week, right? When we go on vacation, we just sort of say, okay, yep, not going to do it this week, right? I'm not going to get on any kind of social media. I'm just taking a break. I think this is also really helpful. Kids that are struggling with ADHD, kids that are struggling with anxiety and stuff, just, say, should we do an experiment? Let's just see how it feels. Let's just not do whatever their social media of choice is for a week. See what it feels like. How are you feeling at the end of that week? How does it feel to not have it? How does it feel to unplug from it? Does that make sense? So those are some possibilities. Oh my gosh, we're already getting to the end of our time here. So I also think it's important to let your kids get bored, right? Boredom is actually a great place for creating creativity, and I think that they need moments that they're bored. So don't be afraid to let your kids be bored. Apps you should know about that could be worrisome. I just want to kind of throw this in here. There are ways that kids can, and adults for that matter, hide things, right? So there are things that look like calculators that are they're vaults for these secretive things, right? So if your kids have these apps, I think one of the best ways to avoid them getting these things is for you to have to approve. I see all the cameras coming out like, oh, I got to check these ones out. And this is just the beginning. And that's the hard part. There's new ones created all the time. So as soon as we get one thing figured out, now there's a new thing, right? And the kids are the ones who know about it. They're the ones who are on it, and it sort of goes amongst them, right? Oh, you just get this app. Your parents will never know that you're on, TikTok when you're not supposed to be or whatever it is, right? So But it's changing all the time, and I think one of the best ways to avoid this is that you have to, whether it's your thumbprint or whatever, but you have to approve any apps that are downloaded. I think it might be a pain, but I think it's absolutely worth it in terms of managing your kids' accounts. I think there's also important ones that are positive, right? So how do we put our parental controls on the devices, right? So there's a number of different things, Net Nanny, Bark, all these different things. Asking your friends with older kids, what are you using? What do you like? What's working for you? Tell me about it. Tell me what it looks like, right? And so I think that we do need to put these controls on because, again, their brains, they're not ready yet, right? And so we have to help them in this way. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster, sorry. So what does the Bible say about social media? You might be thinking, well, it doesn't say anything, but remember, the Bible's a living word, right? And so let all that you do be done with love. I think that in general, love is mentioned so many times in the Bible, and I think that can apply everywhere, right? If you are engaging in social media with love in your heart, and you don't do things out of hatred and anger and all those other things, if we hold on to that, that's a really important piece. Some other principles that are found in the Bible, don't instigate, don't be impulsive, don't be disrespectful, don't gossip, don't seek attention. Love is patient, kind, all these things, right? You guys, we know this stuff. These are verses that we know. Those principles still apply to social media, right? I think grace is another one, right? Like if someone wrongs you, if someone does something on social media and you're like, grace, everybody's learning this stuff. Remember us versus the supercomputers, right? So keep some of that stuff in mind. Know this, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. I think that's a good one for social media, right? Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink or typing. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face-to-face so that our joy may be complete. I think it's really important that we still have our face-to-face interactions, that we speak to people, that we engage with them and we interact with them. So then the question is, should you use social media? You want me to go back? Did you get it? So should we use social media, you guys? What do you guys think? I think only you can answer this question, right? I think that it's a personal decision and there's no right answer. We know ourselves and we have to judge if it's benefiting us, right? So some people don't use alcohol because it's not good for them. Some people are like, alcohol's fine for me. I don't have an issue with this. It's fine. It's benefiting me. It brings joy to my life. Some people, there is not joy in drinking, right? It's the same thing with social media. With social media, sometimes it brings joy to our lives. Sometimes it's good. But we are the ones who have to know ourselves. We also have to know our kids, right? And we can remember that each kid is unique. A friend of mine, she had older children than me, and I think one of the best pieces of advice she gave me was the concept that her 3 kids, she is like, well, I would do this one for this one, but not for this one. And I'm thinking, what? You would take this kid's stuff up to school, but you wouldn't take that one's stuff up to school that they left at home? She's like, oh yeah, because this one forgets their stuff all the time. And it's okay to treat kids different based on their personality, right? I have one kid that's an intense rule follower. I'm going to worry much less about her, right? Versus maybe one who likes to break the rules, right? And so we might have different rules, and that's okay. You're allowed to have different rules based on their own uniqueness, right? I like this sort of analogy. Would you give your child keys to an 800 horsepower Ferrari without any guidance, right? You're like, hey, you're 16. Have fun. Hope you don't die. So no, we would never do that, right? We would teach them to drive first. We would get them a car that's super safe and not huge horsepower, right? We would talk to them about safety. We would talk to them about how to handle it. I feel like turning over a phone to a kid with no boundaries, no expectations, is the same thing as giving a kid keys to a car that they don't know how to drive, right? We can't possibly expect them to do that in a healthy or safe kind of way, right? Does that make sense? So, I think this quote, train children in the way they should go. When they grow old, they won't depart from it. I think it's really important that we do some training for our children. The hard part is they know almost more, probably do know more about it than we do. So we really have to work to educate ourselves as parents and to educate ourselves for our own selves about how to navigate this new place. So no one taught any of us how to do this yet. It's brand new, right? So we have to teach ourselves. We have to educate ourselves about how do I navigate this stuff. And you know, I mean, to be honest, you guys, I told you, my kids don't have phones yet. I've been pretty scared of this world. I've been hesitant. I've been fearful. And then I saw, I think it was actually Gary Vee. I don't know if you guys know Gary Vee. He's kind of an entrepreneur, and he does sort of offensive conversations sometimes. So if you don't like cussing, you don't want to listen to Gary Vee. But Gary Vee he talks a lot about doing things for yourself, and because you want to do them not to impress other people, right? And so one of the things he said about how do we help our kids be successful is he was talking about filling their self-esteem. And so parents need to fill a child's bucket of self-esteem so high that the rest of the world can't poke enough holes to drain it dry. And I think that, honestly, this is the thing that I'd like to leave you guys with in terms of what I'm going to present, is that if you want to protect your children, the best way to do it is building their self-esteem, giving them the confidence to say, of course I'm not on this social media platform because I am having too much fun living my life and not posting about it, right? When somebody tries to make fun of them because they're not on it, right? Or the ability to say, no, I'm not going to send you that picture. You go ahead and try it. I have the confidence to come back and combat people when they're really trying to prey on them, right? And trying to harm them. So our job, I think, our most important job is to fill their bucket with self-esteem that they're never going to be the ones who get targeted, right? And so we want to fill them up.